I'm your host, Liz Paul. And in this episode, I talk with Kate Hagen, an LA-based writer, producer, and senior vice president of The Blacklist. The Blacklist is a writer-centric community and ecosystem that helps writers get their work read more widely in the entertainment industry. In our time together, Kate and I talk about her personal journey into Hollywood, her article, Fat Girls on Film, and the current state of body diversity on screen. We also spent some time talking about Kate's hometown of Cincinnati and how it's becoming a major filmmaking destination city. So I guess, let's just start with, your journey into film and your love for cinema.
I am very lucky to come from an incredibly supportive family, but nobody really worked in the creative arts in my family until me. And I feel very fortunate that I get to sort of do what I want to do and live the life I want to live. And the support from my family has allowed me to do so. But yeah, I was born and raised in Cincinnati, Ohio, only child on both sides. So I had a lot of time to myself as a kid. And around probably about 10 years old, I started figuring out that I could get unfettered access to HBO and movie channels at my grandmother's house on the weekends. And that's really around the time that I started really getting immersed in movies. I will tell you, movies were not sort of my initial career. My first true love is alternative music, and specifically WXY 97X. The legendary radio station in Oxford, Ohio. So my early kind of childhood and teen years, I thought I was gonna get to go be a DJ for WXY, which, is a career that doesn't really exist in a sustainable way for most folks anymore. And of course, WXY, unfortunately, suspended broadcast about 20 years ago at this point. But
oh, wow, yeah.
Yeah, but at some point in high school, I started thinking more seriously about pursuing a career in film. And at first I was like, I'm going to sort of pursue the film journalism path and see where that takes me. And I had a friend who had gone to Columbia College in Chicago and really raved about their experience there and what a great community it was and what a sort of microcosm of artists it was. So I knew I wanted to get out of Cincinnati and get out of Ohio for college. So I started looking at Chicago as sort of like the next best step in that journey. So I did end up going to Columbia. I did my undergrad there, majored in film and video, and kind of concentrated in screenwriting. Wrote a bunch of scripts, kind of did that whole film school shuffle, saw a ton of great movies, met some lovely people. But Columbia has a really great program called Semester in LA, where you do your last semester of film school here in Los Angeles. At that time, it was on the Raleigh Studios lot, which was very cool. It's like a sort of first entry point and first place to spend some time in Los Angeles. I had never been here before I moved here. And I moved out in 2012 in February, and I've kind of never looked back. I did have a circuitous route into the industry itself. I like to remind people that there is no one path through the industry because you can only follow your path. People have lots of advice and ideas about the quote unquote right way to do things.
Mm-hmm.
And there is no one perfect way to do things. There's only your way to do things. So I applied to hundreds of jobs my first year in Los Angeles, a ton of assistant jobs, a ton of sort of traditional like first jobs in the industry, and none of those kind of panned out. I went on dozens of interviews, did that whole kind of shuffle, but what I had realized in my internships is that I had a knack for covering scripts, and I was like, okay, that's something I can sort of keep cultivating even though I need to get a real grown-up job because I am out of money 6 months into living in Los Angeles. So I actually worked in LA public schools for my first year here, but I kept doing screenplay coverage for a couple of friends that I had made through internships, a couple of like smaller sort of screenwriting contests, submission portals, things like that. And then a wonderful woman that I had interned for in August 2013 was like, hey, the Blacklist is finally hiring readers for the first time since they launched, and I think you would be good for this. You should apply for it. So I applied, I got hired, and I made that my full-time gig starting in August 2013. I wrote about 300 scripts in 8 months for the Blacklist. And
Wow.
then, yeah,
I
yeah,
bet that was a huge learning curve or just
yeah, I always tell people that's in my mind the number one thing you can do as somebody who wants to be in the industry is read a ton of scripts, especially and particularly the bad ones, because
Mhm.
nothing will make you a better writer and a more sort of incisive creative than seeing people do things you don't want to do over and over again. Um, but in April 2014, Blacklist was hiring a full-time role to kind of just manage the customer service ecosystem and take over that part of the job. And I applied and got hired. And, that is kind of the moment at which my professional life pivots and the path starts becoming clear. It's now been almost 10 years, which seems impossible, working full time for the Blacklist. And my role has evolved quite a bit over the years. I am now an SVP with my colleague Megan Halpern, and I run quite a good deal of our day-to-day business. I run all of our social media. I do a lot of our diversity-driven partnerships with folks like MGM, Sony Pictures Animation. I created and helped curate and sort of cultivate a program we do called the Diversity List, where we work with a variety of community organizations to highlight diverse screenwriters in a variety of communities. Our partners for that are everyone from GLAAD to MPAC's Hollywood Bureau, to the One in Four Coalition. In the past, I've done things like, we had a podcast for a couple of seasons and I was a co-host there. And I do some of our sort of press in the world things. Like, a very cool thing I get to do with my job every year is I get to be in the press room at the Oscars. Absolutely living childhood dreams.
Oh, it's
But
incredible. I can't even imagine. Like
it's
just
very strange. I also now have been there for the La La Land Moonlight fiasco and the Will Smith fiasco,
Oh, wow.
which is
Wow.
very interesting.
Probably two of the most dramatic in the last 20 years for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's a very surreal experience. Every time I do it, it gets weirder somehow. I mean that positively. It's just like, it's such a strange, unique part of what we do and how the industry functions and getting to celebrate folks. But I sort of realized along the way too that my kind of true passion was maybe not for screenwriting, which I had studied and obviously deal a lot with in my day-to-day job as a personal creative. I realized that what was calling my name was more sort of long form critical writing about more about the state of the business,
Mhm.
and just history. I've always been a big media history person, whether it's music, movies, television, whatever. And I think there's a lot to learn as we think about media histories, particularly from the last 50 years and the last century. So I started writing some articles for the Blacklist blog, kind of in that vein. And the one that really sort of caught fire was called In Search of the Last Great Video Store, which I wrote in 2018. And it was talking about the limitations of streaming, the sort of paths to access we had given up by saying goodbye to video stores and physical media, and made a map of every video store remaining in the world that I could find. That piece caught fire in a way that I never would have anticipated. Folks like Edgar Wright and Barry Jenkins were sharing it on Twitter. It led to, hilariously, the Cincinnati movie I talk about in the opening of the piece, Fresh Horses, with Molly Ringwald and Andrew McCarthy. Writing the piece and talking about Fresh Horses led Universal to strike a new print of the movie, which we then screened at LACMA's Old Bing Theater. And the remastered version of Fresh Horses that is now up on streaming, is a direct result of in Search of the Last Great Video Store. So that was a very weird Cincinnati connection.
That
And
has to be amazing. Do you just like dust your hands off and say, "Okay, good job, Kate. Like I'm done." Like
there have been some very, very cool things along the way that I have definitely taken a minute to sort of reflect on. I would say Fresh Horses is one of them. The other big sort of milestone for me was, I had been sort of percolating on the idea of the death of the sex scene in American movies, particularly. And through total happenstance and kismet, I ended up pitching that piece to Playboy. And in the winter 2019 issue of Playboy, I got to curate and edit a section of the magazine and Playboy.com. The piece is called Women, Sex, and Cinema, and I sort of did a survey of the state of sex scenes at the movies, and then I invited some female filmmakers to talk about some of their favorite sex scenes. And that piece has had an incredibly long tail, too. I mean, it's constantly being discussed on Twitter and online. Some of the research I did for that piece, which found that like less than 2% of media currently being made actually has sex scenes, has been, used by other folks in this kind of ongoing conversation about what has happened to sex at the movies and why so much feels so sort of devoid of intimacy and emotion and romance in a relatable way. My friend Scott Myers, who runs our screenwriting blog, Go Into the Story, one of his mantras is always follow your bliss. And for me, the last couple of years, my bliss has been less in the sort of making movies and more talking about movies space. And I have really enjoyed like getting back to some of the critical muscles, which, to bring it full circle on the film school experience, I think that's kind of what I went to film school to do. And now I'm doing it 15 years later through a very twisty and turny path. And I still am so fortunate to be able to do that along with my full-time job for Blacklist. And I'm just very grateful to be doing what I do. There are things that I've gotten to do that teenage Kate would have been absolutely astounded by and absolute disbelief by. And I keep those fires burning for her, and I keep pushing forward for her, I think.
Oh, I love that. I love that so much. And, and speaking of, you coming back to sort of long form writing in media history, I'd love to talk about your piece, Fat Girls on Film. When I read this piece, it spoke to me because as a child of the 80s and early 90s, larger women's bodies were not on display in mainstream media, like whatsoever. And sort of like you allude to in your piece, any woman or actress over the size 12 was sort of deemed a villain or was deemed, the funny fat best friend or, a side character and not the main character. And so I'm so grateful that you wrote this gorgeous piece on that. Yeah, so just thank you.
I really appreciate that. I have to give credit to someone specific for finally getting me to write that piece, and that is Gemma Gracewood, who is the editor-in-chief of Letterboxd. I had sort of been thinking about writing something like that for years, but I was like, I'm not brave enough. I don't have the stones to do this yet. Like, this is embracing not only like my present self in a very vulnerable way, but embracing all the past versions of myself in a very vulnerable way. But Gemma was incredibly supportive and a huge cheerleader for me along the process. And she really helped me shape that piece into what it is. And that piece, I mean, I have gotten some just absolutely lovely comments on a couple of the things I've written, but that piece in particular and the way it has resonated with the fat girls of the world who don't see themselves in media has been one of the most just incredible experiences of my life. I wrote it for us. I wrote it for all the fat girls who will follow. And I truly hope that we can start making a better world on screen for fat people of all kind. It's so fascinating to me as one of the last sort of taboos in mainstream media as we talk about representation. It's still something people who think they are progressive or, very sort of evolved on, they still have a knee-jerk reaction, I think, a lot of times to when it comes to large bodies and fatness and what that all means. But I definitely I tried to write something that me at 13 really could have benefited from, and I think I accomplished that goal. And like I say in the piece, I'm really just trying to write a love letter to that fat girl in Ohio and tell her she's great and everything's gonna go okay. You just gotta hang tough.
Right. And speaking of Fat Girl in Ohio, let's bring this full circle a little bit. The quote from Francis Ford Coppola, who says, and I'll read the whole thing. And suddenly one day, some little fat girl in Ohio is going to be the new Mozart, and make a beautiful film with her father's camcorder. And for once, the so-called professionalism about movies will be destroyed forever, and it will really become an art form. And that's my opinion. And in this quote, closes the documentary film called A Filmmaker's Apocalypse, which was shot by his wife. To me, it closes the film. And I know he is saying, on one hand, he's saying, I hope that filmmaking equipment, filmmaking financing will become easier so anybody can make films. And a lot of people are saying, this quote is kind of prophetic in the sense that, okay, well, now everybody can make a film with their iPhone. But I wanna sort of unpack, why he chose those words. And of course, we can't get into his head, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's fascinating, right? Like, I remember the first time I discovered that quote in college, and I was like, "I'm sorry, is he talking about me? Like, what is going on, Francis?" I think, it probably comes from a real place within him too. Again, I don't want to speak for Francis and how he sort of self-identifies, but I do think he is somebody who existed in a larger body for a great deal of his life, and probably sort of understands that, fat girls in Ohio have a lot to say and a lot of insight, as people who are not sort of in the spotlight 100% of the time. And I think, he is able to sort of like talk about sort of reframing cinema through that gaze and that like truly kind of independent spirit, truly unique perspectives we haven't seen before. It's so interesting too, because I can totally see where people would read that quote and see it as something negative of like, well, a dumb farm fat girl from Ohio can make movies. But I don't know, I don't see it that way at all. Like, I think he's sort of like empowering a generation of filmmakers to just be like, go make your movie. But I have wondered over the years why that specific word choice, why that specificity. One of my favorite running jokes is to talk with friends whenever people are like, I'm from the Midwest. I'm like, okay, is it Ohio or Michigan? Because I find that a lot of the Midwesterners out here are specifically from Ohio or Michigan. No shade to Indiana or Illinois, but
Right.
that is very much how it sort of breaks down. But yeah, if I ever meet him, that is certainly the thing I'm gonna ask him about. I'm like, yeah, Godfather, Schmodfather. Like, let's talk about this quote, Francis. Yeah,
Let's get down to the real questions here.
yeah. And one of my personal drums I also bang is that I think there's been a real sort of lack of filmmaking about contemporary rural and middle class America. My dad's family is from Eastern Kentucky, and I think about all the time how little media has been made over the course of my life that has really reflected their experience in a way that is relatable, but also I'm going to say inspiring, but I will throw some shade on Hillbilly Elegy at this time in the podcast.
Yes. And that's okay. I'm with you.
There's that sort of like, rural trauma porn vibe, but I'm so not interested in that. I'm so much more interested in the really vibrant and interesting stories of the lives of so many Americans, whether it's in Ohio or Kansas or, the rural deserts of New Mexico. I think a lot of stories are not being sort of prioritized as important and valuable. And to me, that's kind of what the Coppola quote ultimately goes back to is like, yeah, every little fat girl in Ohio has a story to tell. And like, maybe we will get to a point where she is able to tell it in a really easy and digestible way.
I also wanted to get your take on this too. So Francis Ford Coppola created an Instagram account, which has been lovely. But he reposted that quote of him, the little clip from A Filmmaker's Apocalypse, and they edited out the word fat.
Oh, I missed that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, fascinating.
So it's, I think one of the things that I loved about your article, Fat Girls on Film, and just in general, the progression and the progressiveness of larger female bodies in film, with gorgeous actresses like Dasha Polanco, Michelle Buteau is one of my favorite.
Yeah, she is terrific. I'm like, why is she not a movie star, man?
Michelle Buteau, she's gorgeous. She's hilarious. She's witty. I love her. I will watch anything she's in. Nicole Byer, Melanie Linsky. I mean, it's this, for me, this treasure trove of fantastically gorgeous women who are so talented. I'm seen as a 40-some-year-old woman, I'm seen more of myself on camera and in film and in television than I ever did when I was a teenager. So I feel like maybe because it's more female producers, more female directors who are saying we need to show more diversity in body size and body type. Let's actually show the diverse population of women that are in America and the world. And so what do you think about that?
Yeah, I had missed that they edited the Coppola clip. I don't know. It's interesting. Fat is such a loaded word for so many people, and I absolutely understand why. I was very lucky when I was about 19 years old. I got radicalized by all the cool fat girls on Tumblr, and the fact that they were calling themselves fat girls and they weren't running from it, they were embracing it. I was like, wait a minute, I don't have to just keep hating myself and wishing to be thin. There's a different way to live my life. So that has very much been a vibe for me for like 15 years now in terms
Yeah.
of just like fully just calling it what it is, rather than like, one of my least favorite things is when people use a bunch of euphemisms and I'm just like, I am fat, you may say that. It is so much worse when you say things like, I don't mind like bigger bodies, but like like heavy sometimes can feel worse to
Or
me.
big boned, or
Yeah,
oh
and
gosh,
it's just
yeah, I've
like,
heard them all. It's like, oh no.
yeah, and you're like, it's just fat. It should be a neutral term. It's a
Mm-hmm.
descriptive word the same way you would describe someone else as thin or lanky. But I imagine that clip was edited to sort of not draw the ire of the social media going public, which is a shame because I think the quote doesn't quite have the power it does by stripping that from it. But, there has definitely been progress in terms of the kind of bodies we see on screen. I would say, in my mind, it's still very much inches of progress. It has been extremely hard won, these inches of progress, but I can appreciably look around and say there are more avenues and more types of bodies on screen than when I was a teenager. Things have gotten better. Like that is something that I can say with certainty. That being said, I still think there is such an outrageously long way to go. One of my other drums I continue banging is that the way movies in the sort of independent space are financed on the back of which actors are valuable and which actors can generate enough sort of foreign pre-sales of a film to get that movie financed domestically. And when we don't give a diversity of perspectives and bodies that sort of power at the multiplex, whether it's a fat actor or a queer actor or a black actor, and they are seen as quote unquote unfinanceable, we are then creating a system where nobody is ever going to break out of the mold that is not a sort of straight white beautiful person that fits into sort of conventional standards of beauty.
Right,
So
right.
that is one way I would like to blow up the film industry, is break that foreign sales model. So just no problem, just a total change to the whole way the indie business is run now. But I think it's tough too, because for every good news story, I feel like I've heard a bad news story too. Like, I do think progress is definitively being made, but like so many other questions of diversity in industry, it is being made extremely slowly, and we still have so far to go before we are approaching anything like parity when it comes to a diversity of all kinds of people and bodies on screen.
Right, right.
It's an interesting one too, because like I was saying earlier, I think it's one of those things that people don't even realize that they still have a bias against, until you point it out to them, and then they get very defensive and weird about it, and you're like, I don't need you to get weird about it. I just need you to acknowledge that like you didn't think about the perspective of somebody who lives in a body that looks different than yours,
Right,
and
right.
maybe use that as a growth opportunity.
Yeah.
Really wacky idea, I know.
Right. As an Ohioan in Hollywood, in general, have you noticed any trends of, the lens in which Hollywood views Ohio as a whole?
What's fascinating is the way in which Cincinnati particularly has kind of come back around as a really exciting filming location for people. I have to give a lot of credit to Todd Haynes, and I think particularly Carol, for really reminding folks that Cincinnati can double for like old timey New York, and there's a lot of really beautiful opportunities to shoot interiors and exteriors in Cincinnati. It absolutely broke my brain to go see Dark Waters and be like, wait a minute, that's the Tri-County Mall Benihana. Like, why is Todd Haynes making a movie at the Tri-County Mall Benihana? But I definitely think it's become a very appealing shooting location for a lot of folks. My mom's hospital, I think they were in consideration to shoot Killing of a Sacred Deer there, which was very cool, just to even speculate on. And then I'm so curious to see the new Jeff Nichols movie, The Bike Riders, because they shot a ton in Cincinnati.
Yes. Jodie Comer and Austin Butler and Tom Hardy, right?
Yeah, yeah. And some of the like the shots from the trailer, I'm like, oh, I know where that is. But it's been really cool to see Cincinnati pop up in more sort of stuff the last couple of years. And I don't know, I think Cincinnati has gone through a really interesting growth spurt since I've been gone. I left in 2008. And it's become a very appealing city, I think, for a lot of younger people that it wasn't necessarily 25 years ago, that wasn't necessarily the vibe. And I think people are realizing it's a really nice mid-sized city where you can build a very cool and interesting life. And for filmmakers, you know, too, I think it's really nice because you're not far from New York, you're not far from Chicago, you still get that
Right.
sort of like rural feeling without having to go to Kansas for 3 months. Sorry to Kansas, no shade to Kansas, a beautiful state, excuse me.
Right, but exactly. And, you know, you've got the river there, you've got Kentucky right across the river, and, you know, yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, but I don't know. I definitely felt and still feel I am a person who went to public school. I did not go to an Ivy League college. And I feel like there is still an inherent bias in a lot of the industry that if you didn't go to private schools, if you didn't have quote unquote good breeding and do all these other sort of things that a lot of people in the industry do have access to, that you are somehow not as worthy of being here. I think it's gotten better in my time in Hollywood, but I definitely, I mean, I talk about this a bit in the Fat Girls piece, but like I would go on these interviews for these assistant jobs and it would be like me and six, like, you know, Nordic looking supermodels. And I'm like, well, me, the little fat girl from Ohio, is not getting this job. And, you know, unfortunately, LA is a beauty town. It is a perception town, as you know, that being said, with all the many other things I love about living here. And I don't know that we'll ever get over that. That's just kind of a bug of the system of living here.
Right. It's Hollywood, it's smoke and mirrors, it's
Yeah,
glitz and glam, you know?
but I have been encouraged to see some of the just the ways in which things have changed a bit. Like I think about I know this is a difficult one and is a difficult one for me to talk about still, but Barbie Ferreira's character on Euphoria, had she existed when I was a teenager, like that would have been one of those characters that I was like, my whole entire life is pivoted on this portrayal of this one character. I didn't know I could live my life this way. And I'm hopeful that more of that stuff continues as younger viewers are sort of demanding more interesting, more sort of diverse perspectives that aren't just what they've seen before. But I think it's also going to take the industry, you know, giving an inch and taking some chances on things that they may not think are a slam dunk, to just give some of these people an opportunity to show what they can really do.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. Speaking of Barbie, in the Barbie movie, you know, seeing, you know, the various Barbies and Kens, you know, I thought was just brilliant.
So great. I love seeing my girl Sharon Rooney, who's
Yes.
the star of my Mad Fat Diary. Again, like, had I seen Barbie as a child and seen her, I've been like, wait a minute, there's fat Barbie. I'm going to be fine.
Right.
I want to see all kinds of fat characters. I don't need my
Yeah.
fat characters to be virtuous. Like, one of the things I liked about Kat on Euphoria, she does some stuff that is not great. And I appreciated that she got to be messy and she wasn't just this sort of like, you know, saintly fat best friend who takes everything on the chin. I am definitely seeing some waves shift, even just in like personal conversations. And I don't know, I feel like there's a little bit less of a knee jerk, like, you know, if I like self-identify as fat, people are a little less weird about it than they were 5 years ago, but we still got
Right.
lots to do.
Oh my gosh. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to add just about maybe like Ohio's representation in Hollywood or?
I hope filmmakers realize through movies like The Bike Riders, that Cincinnati in particular is a really great place to shoot a movie and offers a very sort of unique, scenic backdrop for a movie that is, you know, can be achieved elsewhere. But I think, to your point earlier, you know, you've got mountains, you've got the river, you've got city locales, you've got rural locales. I don't know. I just hope all the fat girls in Ohio sort of realize their power earlier than I did, and, you know, realize that they contain so much more than they think they're capable of, and to take those big swings and really just try to live a life less ordinary and, you know, do whatever is calling to you. You don't have to just, you know, stick around in Ohio if that's not the vibe for you. You can take those experiences into the next chapter of your story. And sort of, you know, Ohio can keep a very special place in your heart, but you don't have to physically be there for that to be the case. Yeah, I'm hopeful for a better world for all of us. I would love to see, you know, 10 years from now, like, some of these conversations have just sort of receded. I just want to see more interesting looking people in movies, period. Fat people are part of that, but I also am like, I miss like character actor faces. Everybody is too beautiful now, and it feels so unreal to me.
Like, I want to see a frown line, damn it.
Yeah, or like, you know, a jacked up tooth, or, you know, oh, an interesting birthmark. Like, I don't know. I watch a lot of old movies, and I think about how often folks were being cast because they weren't the correct person for the role, rather than they fit some sort of mandate, or they got X number of foreign sales financing. I'm like, can
Oh,
you go
right.
back there, please?
Right. Yeah, you're so right. Like Casablanca and the like character actors and like, you know, yeah, interesting. You're right. Interesting noses and interesting, you know, all those features.
It's funny you said Casablanca because the person I was thinking of was Sydney Greenstreet in Casablanca.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
But yeah, Fat Girls in Ohio, you know, it sounds cheesy, but like, believe in yourself. There is no limit to what you can do. Taking that first step is often the hardest part, but, you know, some of us are really trying to make it not as crummy of a world for y'all going forward, and I hope we can continue on that mission going forward.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, Kate, I cannot thank you enough for being here today. So great.
Yeah, thank you for thinking of me, Liz.
That was LA-based writer and producer Kate Hagen. Head to our show notes to follow Kate on social media and check out links to read some of her incredible writing. Subscribe to Heart of It All wherever you get your podcasts. And do us a favor and share this episode with a friend. Word of mouth can go a long way. And as always, thank you for listening.